Hello everybody, welcome to Dave's Takes. My name is Dave and this is my first video. So if this is your first video, it's also my first video. I am going to be doing on this channel, I'm going to be actually reacting to political history videos. You might know my other channel, Election History, wanted to do reaction videos, but I didn't want to do it on that channel. So I'm creating an entirely separate channel. So we're going to go ahead and look at political history videos and maybe some videos like today's video that touches into current events, but also maybe reflects at the past to see if there is any sort of continuity in history regarding politics, so on and so forth. We're going to do videos about American political history, foreign political history as well. And maybe even Cold War history, because I'm a huge Cold War buff. So thank you for coming to the first video. This is a video that was recommended on my Discord. I will put the link down in the Discord below. I'm going to be going over the ones that have been put in here so far. So if you want to recommend one, just go over to the video reactions request and put it in, because I will be doing these quite often. So we're going to look at this Monsieur Z, talking about history is repeating, and has this all happened before? Now, I have not watched this video yet. I do not know what to think of it. I do know that in the history community, Monsieur or Z, excuse me, is considered a pseudo historian, right? Not exactly the kind of label you want, but let's see what he has to say. I don't know where he might be going with this, but we'll see, because I do think it's quite interesting that as Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt, but then Mamdani and Trump. I mean, I could see maybe where those connections are, but not really. It'll be interesting to see how he blends those in. So let's go ahead and watch this.
It's obvious that politics have changed. The actions and rhetoric of both Democrats and Republicans today would be utterly unimaginable by leaders of the same party only 2 decades ago, even 10 years ago. That's obvious enough. That's old news. Yet the whiplash of the dramatic about-face almost has some onlookers paralyzed and unable to see or understand what's right around the corner. History is repeating. You've heard me say this before. What you just heard me describe was a perception of the United States in about the year 1900 and the...
So I'm just going to say I haven't heard him say this before. This is the first time I've ever watched a video of his on his channel. The only time I've ever watched a video of his before was when Chris from Vlogging Through History just absolutely decimated any arguments that he had about Woodrow Wilson. So this is actually my first time watching one of his videos.
2 decades which immediately preceded it. Why don't we hear much about this period of American history that echoes so strongly many of the qualms and troubles of today? That's right about where we are right now, and the trend shows no signs of stopping. America is transitioning from its Gilded Age to its progressive era. Let me paint a picture for you.
I could see that.
The country has been under the effective domination of one ideological faction for decades, one which did witness as the country achieved new heights of unprecedented power and advancement, but much to the detriment of the common American and much to the benefit of wealthy elites whose megacorporations...
I think he has his graphics mixed up a little bit here. I don't think NASA was around in the Gilded Age.
...became entangled in the political establishment. Calls for reform mount, and not just from one party or faction, but across the aisle. Reform leaders arise, being called extreme and radicals by the establishment, which is inevitably overthrown, ushering in the reformers' plans for the common citizen. The era is not without its fears and controversy, though. What's seen as America's native population has dropped below 50%, and the country is being hit by waves of unfettered immigration. Policy has been set forth to arrest and deport immigrants with radical ideologies, bar anyone who would become a danger or public expense, and firm assimilation policies have been imposed upon all newcomers. Not only that, the early...
I don't know what the immigration argument is here. I could see where he was going before this, and then it's just like, hey, let's throw in some immigration here, right? It'll be interesting to see where he goes with that, but It just seems kind of like a let's throw this in for a little spice. So let's see where he goes with that.
Reformers held a new sense and understanding of America's might and were very intent on utilizing it in new ways, intervening in Latin America and pursuing additional territorial acquisitions. But in time, even the reformers were seen as insufficient to meet the needs of a new rising class of Americans, the young generation born into the new advanced America set up by the establishment, unimpressed with how far the country had come, and acutely aware of the system's flaws which impacted them more than anyone else. Thus, the reform leaders upped their game, going further into radicalism but feeding schism within their ranks between those clamoring for a greater future and those clinging to the satisfactory present. The schism proved too great, and in time the party broke, with those most radical realigning under the alternative banner, thus bringing about an era of even more radical reform.
But I think, I mean, if we look back at, let's say, maybe he's going with Taft and Roosevelt on this, and then comparing it to the current breaks happening within the MAGA movement, okay, which is, you know, fracturing a bit, right? You have the Nick Fuentes, you have the Trump wing, you have, you know, wherever Tucker Carlson is, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey. They're doing their things. It's like fractured. But at the end, you know, we'll see how that plays out. I don't think that what we're seeing now is akin to what we saw during, let's say, Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. The progressive movement had already had roots post Civil War. So it wasn't something that was thrust upon the United States at the time, or a political party at that. So I don't know if it's necessarily the same. Another thing too that we need to keep in mind is, yes, Teddy Roosevelt was a flamboyant figure, to say the least, right? Donald Trump is as well. I don't think that Donald Trump has an ideology as much as it is a figurehead-led movement, a cult of personality, very similar to what I would say with Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania. As a matter of fact, I think that the Ceausescu cult of personality within the MAGA movement right now is a good example of what you see. People like Teddy Roosevelt, but he wasn't a cult of personality. So I don't know, again, we'll have to keep on watching. I don't know if that's where he's going, but looking at that graphic or that thing that he had up there of Taft sitting down and it looked like Teddy Roosevelt or somebody was coming, I'm thinking he's going to make that assumption, but we'll see.
There are noteworthy differences, of course, but it's obvious the same rhythm is being played and all of the country is unwittingly dancing right along to it. There are serious implications for the Republicans, the Democrats, and the future of the country as a whole. We'll start with the quickest analysis, but also the one that's going to feed into all the rest. The Democrats don't know who they are right now. The loss to Trump in 2024 and the aggressive policy of this administration is putting the Democratic Party's factions under survival pressure. Any personal biases aside, the Democratic Party's messaging is confused, its old guard is uninspiring, and for too long the party has characterized itself as nothing more than Trump's opposition.
And I will 100% agree with that. And to go ahead and just put a cherry on top with that, as someone who votes Democratic, right? I consider myself moderate to center left on some issues, but on economic issues such as, or fiscal issues, I should say, not fiscal as far as the budget, but personal fiscal issues such as being able to afford food, healthcare, stuff like that, social safety net programs and all that. I am extremely far to the left. So with that being my case, I will say that the cherry on top is that the Democratic leadership still wants to hold on to power. And we do see this in the Democratic Party. It's not that they're just uninspired. It's that they're uninspired, but they also want to keep power. Nancy Pelosi stayed there for too long. Dianne Feinstein stayed there for too long. We already are saying that Chuck Schumer has stayed there for too long. Jill Biden pushed Joe Biden into staying for too long. And if we go across the pond, we can see Keir Starmer stayed there for too long. Okay. So we do see this even in kind of like center left politics worldwide. We do see this old guard. I mean, even though, Keir Starmer is new-ish guard. I mean, he's not Andy Burnham. It's definitely not Jeremy Corbyn, right? I think that there is this wanting to hold on to power. And that's just another problem on top of the problems that he mentions here.
This blew up terribly for the Democrats under Joe Biden's presidency, which was probably the best shot at a unifying but still advancing figure they had.
Yeah.
Biden was a believer in FDR-style New Deal policies. He had a sympathy for much of the party's progressive youth wing, but was established enough to work within the system and rein in even the most senior Democrats. And yet, the administration fell far short of its goals, and the party grew so uncertain of Biden's abilities that they eventually ousted him. And then...
Well, two things with that. Okay, two things. One, I don't know if the party ousted him, right? Had that debate performance not happen, which coincidentally was before the conventions, you still had time to change who your candidate was going to be. They would have kept him, right? So the party didn't push him out. He had a bad debate performance. He was seen then as unelectable because he said, we defeated Medicare, one of the biggest blunders of all time in a debate. And that led to everything that eventually happened. They gave us Kamala Harris. Had that debate not happened, the Democrats would have no problem staying with Joe Biden. They wanted to stay with Joe Biden. They didn't kick him out. It was only that debate that they kicked him out in. So I think that's a very important thing to realize. There is another problem with the Biden administration, which was that they kept on saying, and I think this goes on what Monsieur Z is saying here. They kept on saying the economy is great, the economy is great, the economy is great, but people weren't feeling it. That is a disconnect.
Afterward, the party fumbles the bag again, ousting then vice chairman of the DNC and hardcore progressive David Hogg over a DEI issue. At least officially, that was the reason. More likely than not, it was because he threatened to primary ineffective Democrats who failed to push forward the party's agenda. Despite the party's attempts at gatekeeping, the progressives are breaking through. This was an inevitability.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the Democratic youth base are not liberals in the same sense as older Democrats. They are progressives. The old guard of the party could hold them back, but eventually they would seize the reins of power, and we're watching that unfold right now across major US cities like New York, where progressive Democrat Zoran Mamdani won nearly 80% of the city's youth vote. I've seen a lot of people hone in on Mamdani getting so much of the foreign vote. Who cares if he got 30% of the foreign vote? 80% of the youth vote is crazy. That's not in the primary. That's in the general election. To pretend that this is not...
That's in a general election that had his primary opponent in the general election. Right? So that's something you need to keep in mind. Okay, so he is addressing what I was just talking about a second ago, which was that gatekeeping, talking about the Nancy Pelosi's, Dianne Feinstein's, Chuck Schumer's, and all that. He is bringing that up. And I do think it's interesting because I've heard that, this guy is more on the conservative side. He's not using the word democratic socialist because usually when you watch these videos, if it's conservative, they'll throw that socialist and communist out there. He's saying progressive Democrat. I give him credit for that.
Not what the majority of young Democrats want. It's absurd. It's denying reality. And again, all of this while he's going up against liberal Democrat Andrew Cuomo. And this will also be telling for when we talk about the Republicans, the fact that the majority of the Republican Party in New York City threw their weight behind a liberal.
Right.
That this liberal would get the endorsement of President Trump, of Elon Musk, of Republican organizations and commentators. Like it or not, that says a lot about the state of the Republican Party and its values. And it is not a good picture. So going back to the Democrats, it's obvious the weight of the future is behind the progressives. but the party still has been slow to embrace them.
Right.
And so it remains divided between progressives, moderates, and liberals, with the liberal old guard currently propping up one of their own, Gavin Newsom, as the prospective presidential candidate come 2028.
Well, and one can say that this is an issue with federalism, right? A candidate that's going to be electable in, let's say, Kentucky, like Andy Bashir, is going to be different than Zohran Mamdani. It's just a natural cause of federalism where you have state executives running in all 50 states. What's electable in one place isn't electable in another. And then you have to take all these aspects of federalism and then try to figure out for a nationwide election for president, who do we have that can get us the most votes nationwide? And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have too, is one of the biggest problems in elections. I don't know as much about the Republicans, but the Democrats are very much thinking of electability more than they think about issues. But the problem is, I don't think that the Democrats themselves know what is electable, because they're the ones that said that Trump was going to lose all 3 times. So they do have a credibility issue when it comes to understanding and seeing electability. Same thing with Mamdani. They thought that Cuomo was going to win, the establishment Democrats I'm talking about here. But that did not happen. So, and remember, there was also a Democratic Socialist who won on the same day in Seattle as mayor too. So it wasn't just New York.
So similar is this to the Democratic Party situation in the early progressive era, split between populists, bourbons, Southerners, and the emerging progressives. First, they absorbed the populists and were convinced that William Jennings Bryan was going to lead them all along the rainbow. Then they pivoted back to less populist messaging, something that was more respectable, something that was a safer win. And then once again returns Bryan as the progressives fully emerge as a movement of their own within the Democratic Party, which throws its full weight behind populism. Still, it fails. But then, in a double whammy, not only is the Republican vote split, but the Democratic Party finally realigns fully under the progressive youth wing, becoming a party in line with the sentiments of the time. That is where our modern Democratic Party is going. Full realignment under the progressive youth. But the Democratic Party finally realigns fully under the progressive youth wing, becoming a party in line with the sentiments of the time. That is where...
So is he saying that Wilson embraced the progressive youth? Because there's there's no evidence to that. Right? That would be 100% speculation when it comes to voting behavior, understanding voting behavior, and just having the data behind it. Even the first ANES studies, that's the American National Election Studies, started at the University of Michigan. University of Michigan still does it. This is kind of the top dog, the gold standard when we try to understand voting behavior in election. They started that in 1948, and even in the 1950s, the questions they asked were very open-ended. You couldn't even glean anything out of it. So to me, what he's saying here is just pure speculation that the progressive youth went behind Woodrow Wilson. Okay. To me, that's just pure guessing. There's no, I don't see any evidence as to that happening.
Where our modern Democratic Party is going. Full realignment under the progressives sooner or later. Now, as divided as the Democrats may be, the Republican Party is replaying the schism between Roosevelt's radicals and Taft's moderates. And right now it seems like the only thing holding that back is Trump's unifying leadership in the Republican Party. As well-spoken as J.D. Vance is, or as experienced as Marco Rubio may be, neither command the same loyalty from the party members that Trump does, and that is a problem for their future prospects. We need to remember that while President Trump scored a massive victory in 2024 because he got a trifecta and the first Republican popular vote victory in decades, the election was far from a landslide. 49.8% of the popular vote against 48.3%. Now, okay, you might say the popular vote doesn't matter. What about the electoral vote? In states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, the victory came within 2 points.
Yeah.
In places like Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, we're looking at just about 3 points. That is incredibly close when you factor in how unpopular Harris was, how haphazard her campaign was, how the Democratic Party swapped Biden out at the last minute, how aggressively Trump had rallied his supporters. The fact that Trump got shot at. This should have been a landslide for Trump, especially in places like Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. I don't believe Republicans appreciate how precarious their position is, and how important it is for Trump to produce...
That again, I disagree. It should not have been a landslide for Trump. Trump always had a ceiling in what he could do, and currently has a ceiling. He can't break through that ceiling. It'll be interesting to see how he's connecting this to the past. I don't know. I don't know what he's trying to say. We'll keep on going through it, but I disagree with that. It should not. If anything, the polling originally showed a landslide for Harris. But it's always going to be a close election. That's just how polarized the United States is right now.
Major gains and reforms that can change people's minds. And this position becomes all the more precarious when we consider the real risk of party divides. The MAGA Civil War, which we covered in a previous video here. Regardless of which faction comes to dominate the main line of the party, there is a great risk of schism, of a protest vote. Should the party embrace the America First faction, which does represent a large chunk of the youth base and the future of the party, there is no doubt going to be a segment of Republicans who will denounce their big government policies as socialistic, deride their social values as woke right, and decry the faction's opposition to Israel as anti-Semitic. Such a thing nearly occurred even when Trump came out in support of something like in vitro fertilization. Now granted, this did not involve the America First faction, but rather the more low church and small government faction of the party, who argued that Trump was not pro-life enough, and somehow thought that protesting the election and letting the Democrats win would be a better outcome for the pro-life movement. Again, Trump still won, but that gives you an idea of how delicate the party's unity really is. Now, vice versa, many in the America First movement have made clear their intentions to not vote for any Republican candidate who refuses to conform to their values. This has reached a point of some, whether jokingly or seriously...
And this, I think, is kind of funny because they accuse the Democrats, accuse Bernie supporters of the exact same thing. The Bernie or bust movement, right? So the Democrats or the progressives, they see this as well.
Saying that they would rather vote for someone like Gavin Newsom over J.D. Vance. Now that alone poses a risk, but not yet a realignment. However, imagine if Gavin Newsom, we'll say, played into it. Or not even Gavin Newsom.
He's tried to,
some other Democratic candidate emerged who actually conformed to at least some of this faction's desires while still maintaining the Democratic base. Say a Democratic candidate who vowed to enact an immigration moratorium, or abolish the H-1B visa program, or cease all foreign aid. Why, it wasn't too long ago that a progressive like Bernie Sanders railed against immigration and H-1B visas for their abuse by corporations and the way they denied jobs and wage increases for Americans. As for the foreign aid, all you would need is the right spin. Instead of sending our tax dollars to corrupt regimes abroad, let's invest that money in a universal healthcare system for Americans. Boom. You win progressives and the America Firsters. Suddenly, 80% of the Republican Party is people over 50, and elections become impossible to win. It would be that easy for the Democrats.
And it's, I mean... I don't see where the historical significance is here. Maybe he's going to get to that. He talked a little bit about Wilson. I don't see how this is connecting to, we have seen this all happen before. Maybe it will in a few minutes. I do not know. But talking, I mean, for all intents and purposes, what he's saying, I can see where he's coming from, the strands of what he's talking about. I just wish he would connect it to the history like he said that he was going to do.
And I suspect it's not far on the horizon. Even Joe Biden's son recently said that any candidate running for president must at least solve the issue of illegal immigration if they want to win. This is such a delicate line for Republicans to walk, and if they don't do it right or fail to read the country's political situation correctly, they risk alienating probably, let's say, at least 10% of their voter base. Either way, they only really need to lose 3% for presidential elections to become a strenuous uphill battle.
That's
the
true.
Hispanic vote is probably going to be a huge toss-up as well. It's part of why Trump won in 2024, but on the one hand, the optics of Trump's deportations have been terrible. I get some of these clips might seem amusing for some, but not so much when people are watching old ladies and families get manhandled by ICE officers, and everyone on the right is just laughing it off. We can enforce our laws and get illegals out of the country without making ourselves look like we lack basic human compassion. Like, nobody wants to see a family separated. It's a terribly sad thing. One, nobody should be laughing at that. And two, this is why we need a strong border. So this doesn't have to be a scenario that we're faced with. Now, on the other hand, some Hispanics may have an improved perspective on Trump since his intervention in Venezuela. This was a rapid and successful operation, but now the administration is talking about possibly intervening in Mexico, which is obviously going to be a much more complicated situation, and whose effects will likely shift how many Hispanic Americans view the administration.
Well, and especially with the Mexico situation, you do have situations in Cuba, Venezuela. Back in the past, you had it with Haiti back in the 90s and other places as well, where people were fleeing those regimes, right? Coming to the United States because they were either leftist regimes or totalitarian military dictatorships, like in the case of Haiti. But on the other hand, you know, Mexico does not have that internal strife. Claudia Sheinbaum is very much a popular president. Obrador, whether you agree with him or not, was very much a popular president. There's no one, for all intents and purposes, probably no one at all, I'm not going to say it definitively, but it just seems to make common sense. No one is fleeing Mexico because of political persecution from the Sheinbaum government. Okay, they didn't do it with the Obrador government. Now, maybe back in the days of the PRI that dealt with corruption, there could be those cases, possibly. Doubt it, possibly. People are going to flee more because of the drug cartels and all that. And Sheinbaum, working with the United States, has really started to crack down on those cartels. We don't hear about that much in the news, but I do follow news in Mexico, and we are starting to see that cracking down. So if there were any incursion into Mexico, that would be, I mean, that would be horrible politically. It would be horrible as far as our reputation in the world, and so on, especially because there is no threat here.
And look, if we can be completely honest here, the majority of Hispanic Americans who support Trump's intervention in Venezuela were probably already on Trump's side to begin with. Not all, but realistically, we're probably talking about people who were already conservative and already going to vote Republican. Right. The way things are right now, Republicans have the power to set the playing field however they want. They can set up any piece, any strategy. They have the power to do that right now, but they have to do it right. Otherwise, once it's the Democrats' turn, they'll have the overwhelming advantage. There is a future in which the Trump admin is so successful that 2028 does turn out to be a landslide. However, in my study of American political eras, this only really tends to occur during the second terms of era-launching presidents. Their successors almost always take a hit. This is true of Jefferson. Jackson dropped a little in his re-election, but he was also up against more candidates. Lincoln, of course. Roosevelt is difficult to measure because he was only elected once, but he massively improved on his predecessor's lead, and his successors still underperformed him. Same goes for FDR term 1 and term 2, with slight drops in election 3 and 4, but of course Truman underperforms even FDR's lowest vote. Then there's Nixon and of course Reagan. The wild card we might give Trump is that he is the first era-launching president to have a non-consecutive term, so maybe that bodes well for his successor. But the general rule seems to be that the incumbent gets the credit and his successor only keeps a fraction of their momentum. So whether it's J.D.
I
Vance,
don't know. So okay, so if we go look at if we actually look at those, um, that the successor just gets some crumbs. I don't think that's the case with George Herbert Walker Bush. Had he not been Reagan's vice president, the Democrats could have won that election if Bob Dole would have been the nominee or something like that. Okay, George H.W. Bush very much benefited from that. So that's the first one. Um yeah, maybe that's it because Nixon performed worse. Humphrey performed worse. Uh I mean, you have the whole thing with Gerald Ford, which you can't really look at. Bush, Gore performed worse. Dick Cheney didn't run. And well, I guess I mean Biden would be the another exception, right? Because he became president. And if you look at how Biden had done in 1988, I mean, he had to drop out before the primaries. And if you look how he did in 2008, he did not perform well at all. Yeah, so you'd say George H.W. Bush and Biden. But then Biden also had the issue of he took a break. They let Hillary in, she lost, and then Biden came in. I don't know if that's necessarily a great theory because there's so, to me, if you were to do some sort of linear regression of something related to that, your R square would be pretty low.
Marco Rubio, or someone else, they need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet while furthering what Trump set in motion. It's not enough to just be a good candidate. You need someone who is literally the next Trump. Someone who goes harder than Trump, but at the same time, pulls more of the country behind him, and that's going to be tricky. I suspect the more likely outcome, given the uphill battle for Republicans, is a repeat of what we saw in the Progressive Era. A split between the Republican Party's radical and moderate wings, with the radicals potentially launching their own rival party or presidential bid before realigning under the Democrats once the progressives take over that party. In effect, you will have one party believing it's carrying forward Trump's agenda but refusing to advance beyond 2028, ultimately watering Trumpism down to conform with the party's more libertarian and small government factions.
And if you really want to talk about a movement that has done that in recent times, let's be honest, the Ross Perot movement and the Reform Party really was that. I would even argue that the Ross Perot phenomenon was very similar to the cult of personality that we see with Trump. But once he ran a second time, didn't do as well as in 92. He didn't do as well. But even so, he still got enough of the vote. He still was a tiny bit of a factor. Bill Clinton won the race. He was going to win it. But he still did have some pull. But once the Reform Party continued without Perot, it essentially became nothing. It is still registered in some states like Florida and other places. The only exception, I would say, would be Jesse Ventura running under the Reform Party banner. But I think he could have run as a pure independent and not as a Reform Party candidate and had still probably performed the same. The Reform Party itself didn't lead to him necessarily becoming governor of Minnesota. So I would say that the Perot movement is a good example of once the leader of the movement is gone, then it no longer believes in those principles and values and maybe even reforms itself to becoming something totally different.
A party focused on freedom, liberty, and capitalism, but wrapped in MAGA rhetoric. Meanwhile, the other party becomes the big government party, more socialistic and isolationist, economically nationalist in a way, and heavily moralizing. Not a party of freedom, but a party with a strong belief in civic duty, collectivism, and conformity to the state. This is the progressive era transitioning into the New Deal era all over again. Now, before you say the America First movement or any faction of the Republican Party would never switch sides to join the Democrats, don't forget how so many once said the same of the Southerners and the Democratic Party. Reorientation is a very real phenomenon in American history, and the same patterns we saw reorient the Free Soil Party, the Populist Party, the Progressive Party, and the States' Rights Party are appearing right now in our present day. The Republican Party fully embracing the America First movement would probably prevent this, as the movement would now have a vested stake and interest in making what is effectively its own party succeed, instead of feeling that it merely has a seat in someone else's movement. However, for the Republicans to actually win elections, they would need to find a way to keep both of their factions, while also somehow building their support base or somehow court the progressives away from the Democrats, which is more difficult than vice versa.
There's one thing that he is totally missing from this, and I think it's Political Science 101. Bakari Sellers actually said it during the last election, talking about how the most popular candidate is the couch. Abstentionism, not voting. And I think in his analysis here, he's under the impression that everybody is going to participate politically. And I truly believe one of the reasons that the Democrats will do better in the midterm elections is because Trump isn't on the ballot. And if the cult of personality is not on the ballot, then therefore some people might have less of an incentive to vote. Some people might not even know there's an election going on when it's cult of personality based. Okay. So, you have to take into account abstentionism. And I don't think he does that.
No matter how you slice it, Republicans need to be smart and strategic if they want to stay in the game. And if you want to hear more about the parallel...
Okay, so anyway, I mean, overall, I think the overall gist of what he said, I don't agree with his realigning. I don't know what he says about the realignment of the South. That is my next video that I'm doing on the Election History channel. There are a lot of problems with every single person's take on it. I'm taking a very deep dive into it that others haven't. Others have taken kind of a skin deep look at it, or a 30,000 foot look at it and say, this is what happened in the South between the 1950s and the 2000s. But you'll see that in my next video. Overall, I don't necessarily have an issue with the substance. I don't think he goes too far off the reservation in any of these. Like I said, I've seen some of his videos about Woodrow Wilson. I only have seen those because of Chris with Vlogging Through History. That's it. But the only thing in this video I have to say is he says, we've seen this happen again, or seen this happen before, excuse me. I don't see how that's, he didn't really talk about that. I would say 90% of his video is about the current situation. And it's like, let's throw some Teddy Roosevelt in there. Let's throw these other elections in there. He didn't do a great job connecting why this is somewhere we've been before. He didn't do a good job. But overall, so I don't think it's a history video. But overall, I can see where he's making his argument. And other people are making the arguments. And I think what he says is not necessarily an unknown. But yeah, I mean, looking at this video, I mean, it's an okay video. I think that it's an opinion-based video, not based on any facts. That was another thing when he talked about young progressives won over to Woodrow Wilson or to the Democrats. Again, there's no data, and public survey data, public opinion methodology was extremely elementary at the time, to the point of being extremely unreliable, mostly because people couldn't pick universes correctly. But yeah, we'll see what he does in other videos. That's all for today. Thank you very much. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video. Like I said, this is the first one. I'm going to keep on doing this channel. Do it for a while. See how it goes. All right. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good one wherever it is you are. Bye-bye for now.